What do you all disagree about? So we should let Ilya go first this time.
I don't want to speak for the others, but I think there's a couple places where I have taken positions that have been clear and that I think reflect where the district stands. Number one, I've been clear that I oppose any attempt to cut benefits from Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, either from current beneficiaries or future ones. I think that these programs have been critical to sustaining the middle class, sustaining working people and retirees. And when I look at a program like Social Security, which hasn't contributed a single penny to the deficit, which even during the financial crisis paid out every single penny when 401ks didn't, I say it's unacceptable to make any cuts in terms of raising the retirement age, means testing, chaining it to the CPI, or doing any of the changes. I think the way to deal with Social Security is to scrap the cap on how much of income is taxed, and then we can guarantee its longevity for future generations. The other place where I think we'll differ, and again,
I'm sorry, say that again.
we scrap the cap. Right now, if you make $108,000 a year, you're paying as much into Social Security as if you make $108 million a year. Get rid of that cap. We guarantee Social Security is solvent, fully able to pay out benefits for generations to come. The other place where I think we might differ is on the jobs bill we've talked about. I was with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky when she introduced her emergency jobs bill to restore the American dream. I believe that at a time when consumer spending is down, when business spending is down, and John talks about this quite a bit, the only entity that can step in and fill that gap of demand is the federal government. So I do support a federal jobs program that includes hiring people using federal dollars to rebuild our infrastructure, to help foster a clean energy manufacturing sector, and also to help provide loans for small businesses. I think I've been much more clear in a willingness to pass federal jobs legislation and also to defend Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid from anything that cuts benefits, even as we make changes that make the program work.
John, over to you. What's one issue where you differ from?
Yes,
the
well,
other people
actually, so I don't differ at all with Ilya on those two, so I guess those two would be certainly the language that I would use, probably to verbatim. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, to protect the promises the government has made to senior citizens, Social Security, and military veterans. Where I differ is in my background, in the military and in private industry, but focusing on the military and being a colonel in the Air Force, the viability of getting elected, beating Bob Dole in the general, and then serving in Congress as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, which I would get on in my freshman term, is the assumption that I'm making with a lot of reason to make that assumption. Obviously, it's customary for military veterans to get onto that service committee. And to be able to call for a reduction in defense spending, to be able to allocate those billions of dollars taken out of the defense budget into social programs like education and infrastructure are the key things that differentiate myself, because oftentimes, as Bob Dole has found out, freshman members of Congress get put onto smaller, less important committees, and they don't really have a big voice. It's a go along to get along type mentality, which is why Bob Dole is going along to get along and voting what his whips whip him into shape to vote, as opposed to voting for our district. So I am calling for a cut in defense. I'm sure many of the people here at the table are, because we need to. It's part of our fiscal reality that we're in. But when a Democrat calls for a reduction in defense with no military experience, the Republicans hand them their head on a silver platter and accuse them of being communist, terrorists, or somehow anti-military, anti-foreign policy. So I have 22 years of foreign policy and national security experience. I can stare down the Secretary of Defense and the generals and the admirals across the table from the House Armed Services Committee and say, I know where this money is. I know that when we take this $1 billion here and this $1 billion there, we're not going to turn into a hollow force. We're not going to shut the military down. We're not going to all of a sudden betray our allies. But we can move that money over to domestic social programs. And that's really the point of difference here, I think.
Well, sorry, what were you going to say?
No,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think the key difference between the three candidates, or the four candidates and myself, is effectiveness. When I talk about creating jobs and improving education, I have the background and skills to actually make that happen. We know No Child Left Behind ends in 2014, and I was a former Teach for America teacher and an education policy analyst. There are very few teachers in Congress at this point. I can actually speak with authority, and I can take the lead on that issue. I can make sure I know which tests that are worth teaching to. If you look at the old Maryland model from prior to No Child Left Behind, that was a critical thinking skill test. Few, if any, Congress people know anything about it. If you talk about incentivizing learning through a growth model, few, if any, congressmen even know what a growth model is. where you're actually crediting learning, the number of years learning, as an incentive rather than simply a pass-fail test. When I talk about well-trained, well-funded, and accountable teachers, I can talk about accountability with teachers without being seen as anti-union, because I've supported union rights when I was a teacher, and I support them now. But at the same time, we've got to talk about making sure that everybody's accountable and everyone's well-trained. And when I talk about creating jobs, I can actually do it because I'm committed to trading votes for money. It's great to talk about these grand ideas, whether we talk about Medicare or defense, but the reality is that we're one of 435 members. And then you have the Senate, and then you have, of course, the President, who I support. But the point, though, is that when you talk about doubling 90 and 94, that can actually happen because there's a huge highway reauthorization bill that's coming up that we can use that as a way to funnel money into the district. And that's something, whether you're a Tea Party type or you're a progressive like I am, that is part of your job to invest in your community. We don't hear anyone talking about the specifics of what can actually be done. That's something we can get done, that we can get done within the next, the project would last for many years, but it would start, as soon as that highway authorization bill would be passed in the next session. When we talk about investing in a smart grid that pays for itself, it would mean a utility tax rate decrease. Again, it's an infrastructure project that we can support in the next Congress. When we talk about finally solving this whole pro-cyclical problem with the economy, where state governments who have balanced budgets have to wind up cutting spending during recessions when we need to increase it, we can solve that with the reform that I talked about. That is, requiring states to put a percentage of their tax revenue into a federal government lockbox or rainy day fund that can't be rated by state government. And if you do that, and if you provide that money back during recessions, you don't have to fire teachers, you don't have to fire policemen, you don't have to fire nurses, and you would condition that entire program on aid now so that we can hire back teachers, firefighters, and policemen. That way we can make an impact now within the next 2 years. I don't want to just be another vote that supports Democrats. That's great. I want to do that, but I want to actually have an impact in the community now when people really need it.
You've talked a couple times about this rainy day fund where states would have to give a portion of revenue into this federal fund that would be saved for rainy day. We're in a state, obviously, that is having tremendous financial problems. It can't meet its debts now. People aren't getting paid. Projects aren't getting funded. Where's this money going to come from in Illinois?
Well, part of it is that, in good economic times, when the growth level is at 2 to 3% or more, there's going to be far more revenue that's going to come in for the state from taxes. So I would say that would mitigate the immediate need. But on some level, though, we do have to live within our means. In the long term, budgets and debts and deficit matter in the long term. They matter for the federal government. They matter for the state government. And we've got to decide what our priorities are. There is no such thing as an unlimited credit card, no matter where you are. And the state government has to find a way to meet its obligations. And that's just a reality. But at least we can minimize this pro-cyclical policy, even if there are, so that we're living within our means, and we're still not having these rapid changes in the amount of in the amount of jobs that are being created or the amount of jobs that are being lost.
That doesn't answer my question.
Where
is the state of Illinois? Where are you proposing states such as the state of Illinois get money for a federal rainy day fund?
I think part of it is increased taxes, and part of it is cuts in spending. I think no matter how you do it, there has to be I can't tell the state government what to do or how to do it, but I do believe that they do have to live within their means. I do believe that if they have to increase taxes to do it, they've got to do that. If they've got to cut parts of spending, there's parts where the important priorities, like the social safety net, the federal government can provide further aid for Medicaid, or for example. But you can't live with an unlimited credit card at the end of the day if you're a state government, and that's true. And that's also true at the federal level. Once debt comes to 120% of debt to GDP level.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brad.
Which question?
The original question was how you differ from the other gentleman at the table.
And I think there are significant differences. When you look at social issues, where we talk about choice, the environment, equal rights, marriage equality, you're not going to find even daylight, I think, include Lois in that, in all of us. But when you look at some of the things that Ilya was talking about, Ilya talks about a jobs program where the federal government is the direct employer, the hire of those people. I believe we need a jobs program. I believe we have to grow the economy and create jobs, but that's going to come from the private sector in partnership with the public sector. I believe that long term, if our infrastructure, new energy infrastructure, electrical grid infrastructure, highways, education, you run across that, private companies working with the public sector at the federal, state, and local level, the federal government can be a source of funds. The decision of how best to use those funds, we can have an influence, sometimes make a statement, but that's going to be at a local level, and private companies are going to be the people that hire, train, and develop. Together, that helps. We also have to have jobs through manufacturing. When I talk about what is our economic growth, infrastructure is a key piece of it. But we also have to restore manufacturing in this country. We're down to about 11% of our GDP is manufacturing, from a high of nearly a quarter of our GDP. 6% of our students graduating universities are engineers, from a high of more than double that. We need to be inventing things here, making things here, and then exporting those things to the rest of the world. We're 5% of the global population. There's 95% of the rest of the world that we can market to. We should see that as an opportunity more than we do as a threat. So that's a key difference. And I think the other area where where Ilya talked about is the issue of entitlements, Social Security, Medicare. We need to have that long, hard conversation. Social Security, when it was passed in 1935, 50% of our seniors were living below the poverty line. Today we're at about 10%, still way too high, but that's the right direction. My goal, we all would, I suspect, share the goal of getting that down as close to zero as possible. But as we look at Social Security, keeping it solvent, not just for the next 20 or 35 years, but for our children's generation and their children's generation, we need to say, how do we do it? I agree, we need to raise the cap. But we also need to make sure that where we're providing those benefits, that we're doing it in a way that continues to bring down the level of poverty among seniors. So an example of an idea that I like, not mine, most of my ideas I borrow from other people, is people with estate taxes, people who are taking their Social Security check and putting it in their investment account or a savings account and passing it on to the children. Let's defer their payment. They've paid into the system, we'll keep the promise. But let them take a credit on their estate tax, and that money keeps the system solvent. Okay. That's an idea that has some impact. It doesn't solve the whole problem. Raising the threshold at which you stop paying Social Security, if we take it completely off, addresses much of the problem, but doesn't address all the problem. And every problem we face, whether it's how do we deal with Social Security, how do we deal with energy independence, no one answer is going to be the answer. The whole answer, we have to work across the table, we have to work across the spectrum and say, let's try things that will push us further down the road and get us closer to a goal, but we'll never get to zero poverty. That's a goal we have to keep working to and that we never back away from. But finding people who will collaborate, cooperate, and move that ball forward. So I think that's the two areas where we highlight very big differences.